What's up, everyone? It is 2 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon, which means you're tuning in to Cannabis Legalization News. I'm producer Lauren, and today we're going to be speaking with cannabis lawyer out in New York, Elliot Choi. But first, we do have to get into a little bit of cannabis news. So, Tom and Miggy, what's happening? What's going on in the news?
Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday, yeah. Wednesday. Yeah. Likes and subscribes if you're actually tuning into Cannabis Legalization News. And the news out of Illinois this week was there's some rules regarding the tiebreakers, but then you really can't find those rules on the IDPFR website.
Oh, wow.
Called and they're like, hey, where are these? Where's those? I'm like, I don't know.
Hey, I think we should also, because you kind of got your own personal news that I'm not sure if you want to expand upon it, but you want to talk about you don't want to talk about it?
No, but I did get a call, and okay. I should have prompted this earlier, but tell them what's going on in Seattle. I'm going to bring up a question that we got from a viewer.
Oh, right on. Oh, well, you mean as far as the protest goes?
Yeah. The police-free zones.
They took over. Yeah, well, they took over somewhere in the central Capitol Hill area, pretty much like a block in front of a police precinct. They took over. So, I mean, Black Lives Matter. They can't. This is the systemic racism. Here, let me share this with you guys. This is crazy, and it just goes back to more of the point about racism here. GOP Congressman saying the killing of marijuana user George Floyd doesn't deserve protests. I mean, just based off of marijuana.
That wasn't like a joke headline, was it?
That wasn't The Onion.
All right, that was the biggest news of the week. That was that marijuana moment.
Yeah, that was marijuana moment.
Marijuana moment. Sitting there reporting. GOP Congressman says killing of marijuana user George Floyd. What's that dated?
22 hours ago.
22 hours ago. So June, let's mark it, dude. June 10th, 2020. Pervasive prejudice toward the cannabis plant still on Capitol Hill at the highest power in the country.
Yeah. It's an uphill battle. And it's all the back to that systematic racism I've been talking about. You know, one of my ex-shipmates wanted to argue with me about how there's no such thing as systematic racism. And I'm like, that statement right there proves it. Like, this guy's thinking ahead of time that this guy's possibly a criminal for being a pothead or whatever he wants to say.
Yeah, you know? I don't get it. And then I saw one of these things. I'm actually going to eventually do a Second Amendment guns, marijuana, medical card show. I support the Second Amendment. I'm not the biggest gun guy out there. And so I've just kind of been putting it off. And also the gun people are very passionate about the issues. So I'm like, all right, well, if we don't do that concept.
Well, are they passionate? Because look, if the NRA doesn't stand up for people's rights, I mean.
Oh, no, it's first. When you buy a gun, you need to fill out this ATF form. And one of the check boxes on the ATF form is, do you use illegal drugs? And then there's another thing underneath it that says marijuana still counts. And I'm like, okay, why is my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination a contingent of my Second Amendment right to bear arms? So how come I'm supposed to incriminate? And there's a lawsuit on it. And so I'm like, I like this legal angle on it. And then I looked, and then there's some very conciliatory. And by that, I mean, like, they really don't care about the marijuana user's right to use a gun because he's a bad person. Like, you know,
he'll make bad decisions.
Well, it just kind of makes me think that the people that by and large enjoy guns must not enjoy cannabis, or at least the ones that enjoy guns that are making the rules. And then again, this is why the Marijuana Tax Stamp Act of 1937 was found to be unconstitutional, was because it was a violation of your Fifth Amendment. So for me to be able to exercise my Second Amendment right to defend myself, if I want to go down the block to a Walmart to buy a handgun, I'm going to have to fill out this form. And then I'm going to have to incriminate myself because I'm a medical patient or just an adult in a legal state like you and me are.
Yeah.
Why is my Fifth Amendment right being infringed? And why is my Second Amendment right being infringed? Because cannabis's commercial regulation, and that's the power Congress used, it's a regulation in interstate commerce, is prohibited. Just like they've prohibited heroin. I mean, that's so unconstitutional. And then you look at the actual data regarding who's hurt, Black and brown people.
Yeah, but but why isn't the NRA? Was it NRA?
NRA upset about that?
Yeah,
upset about this form that is self-incriminating, so it's violating the Fifth Amendment, because you have to essentially check a box that says you are a federal crime or you're committing a federal crime, and then it's also infringing your Second Amendment right, which I thought they were supposed to defend.
I really would like to know if, like, the people that showed up the Capitol steps with like rifles and shit, are they mad about this? Have they even tried?
Yeah.
Advocates need to.
How come those guys aren't showing up to legalize cannabis in the streets of New York, for example? Don't forget to stick around. We're going to be talking to an attorney with Vicente Cederberg out of New York regarding New York cannabis legalization news. It's going to be fascinating. We'll also tell you how to win a book.
So what else you got going on, bro?
I am in the process of taking care of a lawsuit. So I actually have to get back into court tomorrow to defend the good rights of people to farm hemp in Illinois, which has been infringed by some non-home rule community. Hopefully it'll be great. And then we are just waiting to get any like semblance on when are we going to get winners and losers, because my phone has been pretty quiet in this, as everybody's just sitting there.
So you're actually going to go to a courtroom and debate and argue for these people's rights to grow hemp in their county or whatever?
That's right. Actually, I'm going to be right here, probably speaking into this microphone. I don't even think, because it's a call-in, but I could, in theory, drive to this rural courthouse. I'd have to wake up at like, sunrise at 5 a.m. and like get in the car by like 6:30 to do it. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense considering I can do it by phone and be way more prepared. So yeah, we have a very cogent, excellent argument. But in litigation, I tell everybody this all the time, because I'm so confident that we're supposed to win this. Like I've just racked my brain to say like, well, what can go wrong on this? Because that's a lot of what being a litigator is CYA. You ever heard those, like a CYA?
Yeah, cover your ass.
Cover your ass. Yeah. And so that's what a lot of lawyering is, covering your ass. And so I just don't get it. And so how statutes work, what retroactive application is?
Yes, it references behind or before. Right.
And so Illinois' law is a good example, right? Illinois legalized cannabis with the CRTA, the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, last year. And did they retroactively say everybody who was arrested for an ounce or less in the past, they were expunged? Yes, they did, because they actually had to write that into the law. If they wouldn't have done that, it wouldn't have retroactively applied. And so that's one of the rules of statutory construction. Shout out to rules of statutory construction. I mean, you guys tuned in expecting us to be doing dab rips. Wrong show. But I do want to get to Daniel's question.
Yeah.
So Daniel is a medical patient from Illinois, and he wrote me and he asked, do you see Illinois changing the law that makes medical patients pick one dispensary to use? Yes, I do. Because it actually was in the bill that was defeated a couple weeks ago now in late May, regarding not only the tie-breaking stuff, which turns out is now going to be done through administrative rule, but also it got rid of that one dispensary match. And so, I mean, how sometimes people say that the adult use or the legal cannabis industry is kind of like a cartel?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now imagine that you could only go to one store. So you're a medical patient and your card links you to a specific dispensary.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah. So I can go with my card. There's one place in the whole state I can go.
Yeah.
Right. But now you can change it, but then you have to change it before you can go. And they're like, well, it's not that onerous. I'm like, well, why do I have to use any particular dispensary at all?
But again, marijuana always gets the raw end of the deal when it comes to any legislation, because they're always over legislating. They're over, constricting, and I think a lot of it has to do with fear at the federal government, period. The
fear is real against this plant. And people think that people who use it are drug addicts. And then you look at the people that are using it and they're actually really, really scientific. They're talking about things like terpenes and trichomes and very, very advanced organic chemistry chemicals and their interactions with your body and what they can do for you, and how the high works and why an indica makes you sleepy. All these things are not simplistic.
And not just that, but even look at you and I. So you're a high functioning lawyer. I run a cow lab. You know, we don't talk about much what I do, but I measurement. I work in DC to 50 gigahertz RF stuff. You know, and but we're not like special like cases of like people who just are pervious to the effects of pot. You know, we just are two Americans, people that said, hey, I need to keep doing shit for my life, to have a life, whatever. You know, that we're breaking that stoner stigma, which is still persistent.
Right. That stoner stigma is out there and it's persistent. And it's going to probably come up in the social equity aspect of New York's cannabis legalization. So let's
New York's got history. Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about the history.
Yeah, let's bring Elliot on. Hey, Elliot, what's going on?
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Truly appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on. Can you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing out in New York?
Yeah, sure. So I work at Vicente Cederberg. We're a national law firm that focuses on the cannabis industry. So we also advise in the hemp and CBD space. The firm was formed back in 2010 by the founding partners, Brian Vicente, Christian Cederberg, Josh Kaplan. So we've been a law firm, the cannabis law firm since 2010, and I think that's pretty as old as you can get in the industry. Those three partners were instrumental in kind of getting Amendment 64 drafted and passed out there. So, legalizing the first state to legalize adult use. People in our employees in our Massachusetts office had an instrumental hand in Question 4, getting getting adult use legalized in Massachusetts. And we do a lot of regulatory and law drafting elsewhere, and so we've had our hands kind of in markets all over the country. We also do work in the psilocybin space, including drafting the recent decriminalization bill that was passed in Denver. So that kind of gives you a flavor of kind of the industries our firm services. And we do everything. We're full service. We do everything from like licensing, NE formation, fundraising, corporate transactions to the big exit MSOs. And so me personally, I'm a native New Yorker. I was born out in Queens, grew up on Long Island. And the firm opened up a New York branch last year in anticipation of adult legalization in New York. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. Which we'll talk a little bit more in detail. But otherwise, I've been trying to get familiar with the cannabis industry, drinking from the fire hose, as they say.
Yes,
and in the last year plus, I've kind of it felt like dog years, and I've learned a ton.
Oh my gosh, doesn't it? Like you're just I remember when a fire hose hit me. It was like Illinois legalized approximately a year ago. And so you'd get tired and like I'd get headaches because like you're just learning all this new stuff, so much of it, and it just keeps coming in. You're learning like new terms for months. And then you start to get it. I mean, like you've gone through a few rodeos. So now, was the Illinois license round your first comprehensive type licensing round that you had to get through?
Yeah, I helped with the last New Jersey round too. But yeah, the Illinois licensing round was pretty intense as well.
Yeah, and so is the New Jersey round. We could talk about New Jersey, but I really want to talk about New York. I mean, they're so close together. And then as a native New Yorker from Queens, where is New York right now with its legalization? If you could give us some evolutionary history on that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tom. I just want to, in light of everything that's going on right now, I think it's important to kind of revisit the decriminalization history of New York. There's a lot of features that happen there that I think will be impactful here. So, we all of us here listening know that the U.S. war on drugs is always and always will be a racial war. Starting with kind of the opium laws against the Chinese immigrants in San Francisco, late 1800s, Aslinger's reefer madness period against the Mexican immigrants, and then Nixon's war on drugs against Black people and the hippies. Obviously still going on today, never ending, and despite the national mood of what I call like cannabis acceptance, we still see disproportionate arrests. Black people are 3 to 4 times more likely to get arrested for cannabis possession, even though all of us know that cannabis is not an issue about your color of your skin. It crosses the political aisle, and all of us enjoy cannabis the same. So there's no reason for Black people and Latinx people to be disproportionately arrested. And as people know, historically in New York, the situation was even more fucked up, especially here in New York City. And so I think it's important to kind of understand the history here and kind of how we got to that place. Just as a quick aside for me personally, I just want to mention that a lot of my knowledge here of the history of New York legalization comes from Doug Green. And for those outside New York, Doug Green was a huge advocate here. He spent decades pushing for cannabis reform in New York. The movement wouldn't be today where it was without him. Unfortunately, just over a year ago, he tragically passed away. And so you lost one of our big advocates here in New York. And so I just wanted to give him a shout out. It just seemed timely.
Nice.
All right. So going back to New York, So last year, I don't know if you guys saw in the headlines, New York passed a decriminalization law. I made, big headlines. Some said maybe it didn't go far enough. Others thought it, was a step in the right direction. But this was kind of the compromise for not getting adult use passed. Now, what people don't know is that, New York already had a decriminalization law on the books already, going back to 1977. 1977, so we have 42 years of decriminalization in New York. Now, a lot of you guys know the history of stop and frisk and all that stuff that happened here, and you're probably wondering how all that bullshit could happen if there's a law already on the books. So we'll get to that, but let me write up some more with the backstory to that 1977 law, and you'll see what I'm talking about here. So 1970s, Nixon's in power. He's doing his war on drugs. People are getting arrested for cannabis possession. Now, out on Long Island, if people are not familiar with New York, the demographic out there is largely white, and the cops are arresting people out there for cannabis possession. And these were white people. And the news articles were focusing on the fact that these are white people getting arrested for cannabis possession. Now, there's one key event, September 1973, Grateful Dead concert at Nassau Coliseum.
I'm going to totally go to that concert later. So what, because like if the Grateful Dead show in Nassau Coliseum in 73 that played a positive role in cannabis decriminalization for New York, I want to know that fact.
Yeah, so here you go, right?
Yeah.
At this concert, like most music lovers, people, want their cannabis, right? So lo and behold, 36 white people get arrested for possession, including an off-duty cop. Now, these guys have enough cannabis on them that some of these people are looking at 3-year jail terms, right? Now, this pissed off the white suburbanite community like no other, right? How dare white people's lives get ruined forever for simply trying to enjoy a concert? God forbid they get thrown in jail, and that's permanently on their records. So this sparked the whole suburban movement. And 4 years later, finally in 1977, we get this decriminalization law passed. And so what it did was it decriminalized possession in private. So that left open the loophole in public, and I think you guys all know where this is going. So for a few decades, cannabis possession and arrests decreased, but also kind of late 90s, early 2000s, especially with America's favorite mayor Giuliani, we had stop and frisk, and what the cops were doing was frisking these people, asking them to empty out their pockets. Lo and behold, you have a cannabis joint in there, you pull it out. Oh, now it's in public. Now I can arrest you for cannabis possession. And
come on, a joint's a gram.
I know, it's like complete bullshit. And so, New York officials, some of them tried to rein this in, like Police Commissioner Kelly, 2011, issued a policy saying not to arrest people for cannabis possession in their pockets. De Blasio, 2014, instituted another policy saying you can't arrest people for public cannabis possession. But, the stats show, and there's too many stats here, that it just didn't happen, right? Like 2017, 2018, it was 85 to 90+% of the people arrested for cannabis possession in New York were Black people, Latinx people. And they only represent like 31% of the population here. And so it's like that's out of control. And we're not talking about a handful of arrests. We're talking about 10,000 plus arrests each of those years.
Right.
Ultimately, we got this 2019 law, which finally decriminalized public possession, among other things. It included, Tom, I know you're big on expungement, and included an expungement element as well.
Yeah.
That's what we got in 2019. I mean, my takeaway from this is—
How many ounces? What do they do?
Up to 25 grams, and then up to 2 ounces is essentially decriminalized.
So they have an expungement, but don't you still have people getting arrested for the plant, though?
Yeah, and I was trying to look this up, trying to see if there was any stats post that 2019 law going into effect, but I haven't found any. But I'm curious to see kind of what those stats ultimately show, and if in fact arrests have gone down proportionally, as we all would hope.
Yeah, but your point about how it's the imbalance of arrests, and it goes to point ending the war on drugs will help alleviate the systematic racism we do have. We have a commenter here, this is Johnny Meyer, when we were talking about Iran on guns, and he's like, his comment is, the Second Amendment advocates is not cannabis, it's guns. But our point is, as soon as you try and get a gun, your cannabis rights are taken away. Your right period is taken away. Like you're treated a lesser.
The form literally made you self-incriminate. So like I'm trying to get a gun pursuant to my Second Amendment right. You're asking me to incriminate myself in violation of my Fifth Amendment right. What? But one of the coolest things that Elliot brought up. So I did look it up. Anyway, this is the set list from Nassau, March 16th, 1973. One of the most American songs ever was played, "Wave That Flag," which I believe became U.S. Blues. So like the U.S. Blues, like one of the most quintessential American Grateful Dead songs ever, one of its first time ever played was March 16th, 73 at Nassau, and then a whole bunch of people got arrested. The most un-American thing that ever happened after one of the most American things.
Yeah. Elliot, is there there's a medical in New York?
Yeah, so right now we have a medical program only in New York, so there's no adult use market quite yet. So I don't know if you guys want to talk about the medical program or whatnot.
But medical a little bit before we
sure.
turn our sights as to the adult use and specifically the social equity. But what's the current status of the medical cannabis laws in New York?
So we started our medical program in 2014 with the Compassionate Care Act. There was a licensing around in April 2015. And so currently we got 10 what we call registered organizations in New York. Each registered organization can have one manufacturing facility that covers cultivation and production, and then 4 dispensary locations. So right now New York has authorized 40 medical dispensaries for the whole state, which you guys tell me if you think that's an adequate number. 38 of them look like they're operational. Now, there's a lot of feedback on the New York medical program, and a lot of people call it, restrictive and limited, and that's because there are a specific number of conditions. There's limited product types. There's no reciprocity with other states currently, and then you're limited to a 30-day supply for your products.
So when you say no reciprocity, we're with you there in Illinois. I can't use this, or you can't use yours if you have a card from New York. When you said limited on products, do you guys have flower?
So right now there's there's no smokable flower in the medical program. The closest they come is you can have pre-ground dry flower pods that you can vape, but
okay, so like a PAX pod.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So dumb though. Like,
and there's no edibles either. There's lozenges and pills and but you can't actually have an edible product.
Well, that's fascinating for various reasons, but that's similar with what they did in Florida before they finally had flower. They had like those. You could have like ground flower that would be ready for inserting into like one of those vape pens, which I'm thinking about getting for my birthday. One of those vape pens, because I enjoy joints. It's too wasteful and too much sometimes. It's too extra. And I used to have a great flower extractor or like vaporizer, and like these suckers, the oil vapes, they don't have the same flavor, and so the flavor that you get from a good flower vaporizer was really, really good. I had one of those volcanoes like 10 years ago, and now I think the technology's really come a long way with the batteries for the portable ones. So I'm really excited of giving up the pipes.
Yeah, the volcanoes are still around too, in pretty much the same form that you probably had.
Yeah, back in college.
Yeah.
So do you guys know how many medical providers there are?
So, currently I'm not sure, there's 40 dispensaries, but registered practitioners, there's as of yesterday, the stats on the New York Medical website said there's 2,814 people that can prescribe medical cannabis, and there's currently 116,191 certified patients in the program.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of patients.
And I get those numbers probably jumped with the recent kind of COVID pandemic.
How do the numbers or how do the licenses work for medical? Because sometimes the licenses that are started in medical very often evolve into their adult use with some tweaks. So how's the license set up in New York's medical cannabis market?
So, the medical license, you have to gotta be vertically integrated. The adult use market, the proposals at least are getting away from vertical integration, but actually prohibiting on the adult use side. So one of the kind of details for legalizing adult use that necessarily hasn't been determined yet is what to do with the existing medical cannabis companies and whether or not they can, switch over the adult use market. There's concern, obviously, if they're vertically integrated and they have adult use dispensary, that could give that dispensary a leg up on the other participants in the market. There's also questions to if, how, and when a medical dispensary could just flip the switch and start selling adult use. So these are still some of the details. And, unfortunately, some of the smaller ones that are now kind of on the table.
Is medical tax-free, or is there a system for you guys like Illinois?
There's a tax on medical. I think it's like a 7% excise tax, plus there's a sales tax on the products.
Fascinating. But then that did happen in Illinois. The medical producers clearly have a leg up. This is their year to have an absolute monopoly. And then because we still were at least 1 month and 10 days outside of when we should have had results. So I don't know how much longer that's going to be delayed and continued, but the longer they delay and continue new entrants from coming in, the only players in Illinois' adult market right now are the medical players. And so I don't know how you contemplate, practically speaking, from a legislative standpoint, how can you flip the switch and go from a medical market into an adult use market without really allowing the current medical players to have that leg up? Do you have any thoughts on that, Elliot?
Yeah, so I think the proposal that have been out there is obviously delay the flipping of the switch until some of the adult use licensees get up and running. And obviously that's going to take a little bit of time to do all the build outs and the like. And, but that's just kind of one of the options that are currently on the table. Another one would be to, the idea, one of the proposals, I think it was Cuomo's, there's an idea of a competitive bid process. And so, perhaps these medical companies would maybe donate funds to the social equity fund or the like. And that could be one way they get a adult use license.
You're gonna have to be careful. Like when Oregon did theirs, they just turnkey. It was okay if you're a medical. Now you'll devote a portion of your product to medical, and then you can still be recreational. Here in Washington, they just screwed everybody. They're like, we're gonna redo this whole program. Because when it was medical, we didn't need licenses. There was no structure. So people just said, hey, I got a bunch of plants. I'm gonna open a store. I'm your medical provider. That was it. That was the barrier. And then when medical or recreation took over, so many people lost their businesses, their investments, like our licensing part. They would get a license, secure a position, and then there would be a moratorium. There's that wave of just getting fucked along the way. Do you guys, I would think the turnkey is the best solution when it comes to, because you're going to have a heads up no matter what. The medical is going to have the advantage because you have the experience. You have we define it as separation of medical and recreational, but all good weed's medical.
Well, I think what Elliot said makes sense. Imagine a staggering of, first you do the cultivator licenses and awarding the cultivator licenses. So, because why would you have dispensaries if you have no product to sell? So the cultivator licenses, and that's a substantial build out, because then you actually have to build the farms. And then after you have the farms built, the state goes, fix that. And then, there's probably going to be a little bit of delay, and then you'll get approval. Magically, the store will bring a whole bunch of clones, and then you can go into production. But, one of the fun episodes that I did with my home grow on the channel here was, just showing how long and just an auto flower would take. And so it was from February 1st through June 1st before you were ready to smoke. Now add a veg and a clone period on that. It could be 5 months from the time that you move in the clones until you start to get up to your perpetual harvest yield. So after you'd have them open, you could then do the round of the dispensaries, because the dispensary is more like getting a retail outlet shop up. It just has fewer moving pieces, And so if you did it that way, and then you'd say okay, it's recreational, but then the recreational sales won't begin until X. It kind of gives some to the black market there.
Yeah, a lot of it's a tough question, and there's if there was a good solution, I think we would already seen it out there.
And I think that brings us to social equity, because it's a tough question and a good solution, and it's an evolving solution and issue in the sense that Miggy will bring the West Coast perspective of real legacy laws that do go back, your firm, all the way to 2010, and that's when I wrote that book and met Miggy. And so from that, just the rules were different. It was just a different game. And so now as the game's evolved, how best can we use the legal tools that we have to, the legislative tools that we have to not only make a product go from a crime to a lawfully regulated product, but repair the harms it would cause by having it be a crime. And I really like how Illinois has set up social equity to really inject it into the license holder itself. If you don't have it, you're not going to get it. But we were talking earlier in the green room, Elliot, what's your take on Illinois' version of social equity, and what would you like to see New York do?
So look, I think Illinois has got a lot of great features to their program. As you said, earlier before we got on, the one thing I was, a little disappointed to see was that the social equity applicant point system for the licensing was 0 or 25. It was, you either got 0 points or 25. And so it wasn't a sliding scale. And so, we had a lot of clients who were really coming in committed to social equity, and we were trying to build these narratives around all these things that they were going to do. But ultimately, if everyone's going to get 25 points, and why can necessarily commit yourself to something that other companies aren't committing to when you're still getting the same amount of points. So it would be nice to see like kind of like a sliding scale on there to give the companies that really had like a true kind of social equity twinge a little bit of a bump up.
Sure. All right. So now turning to the New York draft law, I remember reading it about a year ago, so I'm just not as expert on it as I was really busy with Illinois. How does New York's How does New York's cannabis legalization law address social equity?
Okay, so thanks, Sam. So, there are two kind of competing bills here in New York. One's we call the CURTA, I guess you call it the CRTA in Illinois, and then the other one's the MRTA. And so CURTA is Cuomo's proposal, the MRTA is the state legislator's proposal. And so they each kind of address social equity a little differently. And so to give people the background here and as to why adult use hasn't passed in New York, at least last year when seemingly the public support is there, is that there was, basically a fight over which social equity, program would be implemented. And, ultimately came down to, among other items, but the tax revenue allocation from the cannabis taxes. People on the murder side really wanted a specific allocation of percentages to go to a social equity fund, whereas Cuomo's bill had all the funds going into the general state fund, and then with some promises that some of the funds will come out of the state general fund into a social program. So like earlier this year, there was obviously some good momentum for adult use legalization, and as we were part of discussions to try to figure out how to kind of bridge that divide. And then we had the pandemic, and so that kind of put a wrench in the plans because really it seemed like both sides were going to really kind of entrench into their positions more. I see numbers like a $6 billion shortfall in the state budget, so I can't imagine Cuomo's not going to want to take all that revenue. But obviously, we all know that the pandemic has disproportionately impacted these same communities that were disproportionately impacted by the drug war, and so obviously they should be getting those funds, more funds that way. And so it was hard to see there's still going to be that divide. And then now we have the Black Lives Matter movement, and so it rightfully is putting people are scrutinizing the social equity provisions in both proposals, and I can see people wanting to see a lot more there. So a lot of going on here.
What's the Safer New York Act?
So the Safer New York Act, it incorporates a bunch of different items in there, certain things around kind of police transparency, but it also does include a cannabis legalization bill, and it's the murder version, the state assembly version of the bill, as opposed to Cuomo's version.
When you say murder, is that the name of a
MRTA, the MRTA, the MRTA, sorry. The
Marijuana.
MRTA and the CURTA are the two bills that we refer to here.
So like one of them's going to call it marijuana and the other one's going to call it cannabis.
Yeah, I think ultimately they're both going to use cannabis, but just to kind of, people are just used to calling them that, and so that's kind of how it's developed here.
New York's got such a wild history because, I always thought it was funny and ironic that High Times was based out of there. And then it was the most strictest state. And I was surprised to learn that you guys decriminalized it in 1977. But it doesn't surprise me when a bunch of housewives get together and figure shit out. So,
New Yorkers are really, especially New York City people, are really fond of saying that New York City in particular is the largest cannabis market in the world. I think I've seen figures somewhere around like $2 billion a year, which, you think about it, right? It's like, we don't even have a legal adult use market. What we call the legacy market here is like as all this infrastructure has been working for, decades, and there's some real money involved in there.
Oh yeah, and there's some real growers in New York too. Sour Diesel, didn't that come out of New York, or is that more of a land race? I thought it was a land race.
Did it? I don't know. I mean, I obviously come across it a bunch. I wasn't sure if it,
I thought that was a New York strain, but I could be wrong. I mean,
based on my own experience, that seems to be correct.
But they have to have great growers in that city, and I've never been to New York or bought weed in New York, so I have no idea what an eighth of premium dank goes for in New York City. But I have to admit, it would not surprise me if somebody said $50 to $75. You
can get a little cheap in there probably, depending on So kind of related to one of the other issues around adult use legalization is what's going to happen with that legacy market. There's a lot of people involved in there, and there's do they come into the light? Will they be incentivized enough to do so? And
I think that's what you do. I think that's what you try to make the law written in such a way where, because they already understand the product. And so one of the things that they look for in the scoring of the apps is knowledge and experience in the industry. And it is, in Illinois, at least, our version was a confidential licensure process. And so because it's confidential, you're like, yeah, you know me, I've clearly been running this borough for the past 20 years. prefer if I didn't have to defend everything with guns anymore. I'll pay some taxes. And so that would be really nice if they had that opportunity. But then also, I like how Illinois, though, it is binary points. You either get the social equity points, you don't get the social equity points. But the ways to do it was you have that ownership and control, like you're giving licenses back into these areas that have been blighted or the people that have been arrested. So like by and large, like we were talking earlier in the show, New York was what 80 to 90% black and brown people were arrested for cannabis. So there you go. You know, you're not gonna make a racially based regulation, but it's clearly going to be a racially based regulation. It's like, well, that's not the test. The test is where you arrested, not what color of skin are you. And then we have the disproportionately impacted areas, which are the poor areas in the state that have had a lot of these arrests. Reverse engineer that, yeah, pretty much the same thing. You know, so if you had these maps in areas that are, you know, the poorest. Who are you going to find there, right?
Yeah.
Not the Trumps.
So, because that's kind of what Illinois does, right? In the poor areas, to get a license, the investor has to find someone in that area. Am I correct?
They can. There's two ways to get the social equity. One's the 51% ownership and control for the people that are in the disproportionately impacted areas and have resided there, or have been arrested for just the right amount of cannabis, 500 grams to 10. And because less than 10 was decrimmed. So if you have
and no arrest for anything else, right? Because you have to be just cannabis only. You can't
not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily. So like there's a way, and so like you can still apply, but you'll have to disclose and explain away your criminal record.
Well, here in Washington, you can't be ownership if you have a record, even if it's cannabis.
Ours is not as clear as that. There is an administrative review board and process that if it is the reason why you are denied the license, let's say like you're clearly qualified, you hired great people to do your application, you had a wonderful team, vision, capital, all that stuff. And so like you win, but you're disqualified because of your criminal record, you'll get a written ruling as to like why. And then they would have to go through all these mitigating factors that you had to have disclosed and then explained and say, no, or just say, we believe that you are a good fit for this because you have actually rehabilitated yourself and you could send a larger message about our criminal justice system. So Illinois built that in. Who knows if it's going to work because we're still waiting on scores.
Yeah, unfortunately, right? And so Tom, one thing I saw in the Illinois social equity program that is always an interesting feature is, the ability for the social equity owner to eventually sell, the company the license.
Right.
I saw like, basically after maybe 2 years or so you can sell, and, there really was no penalty if you sold to a non-social equity kind of owner. And that's always like kind of an interesting kind of feature to social equity programs. And I know, there's arguments both ways as kind of whether or not you should allow these social equity owners to essentially cash out to whoever, or if they need to kind of, maintain that license indefinitely.
Well, that's an inference. That is what my inference of the reading of the law was as well. Like if you sell it to a non-social equity, so why would they say like you can sell it to a non-social equity and then have consequences if you can't not sell it to a non-social equity, right? So They don't expressly say that a social equity license can only be sold to a social equity license, but they do say a social equity license that is sold that gets like a discount. So you didn't pay the $5,000 application. You paid the $2,500 application, and then you sell for $10 million, and you do that cashing out. It seems like you can sell it to whomever, provided that, of course, there's license caps. So what do you think about license caps in the New York legislation?
So in the proposed legislation, there isn't any specified license cap. They kind of punt that to the eventual regulatory bodies that would be put in place and the like. So, license caps, I think, generally seemingly have created some market inefficiencies where they're in place. So I'm, hoping not to see that. The one thing I'll mention there is that, at least in the MRTA, there's language that says that, there'll be like that the idea would be to have that 50%, more than 50% of adult use licenses would actually go to social equity applicants. So that's kind of a floor as opposed to a cap.
Yeah.
Well, that's really cool that they have this many of the licenses are earmarked for social equity, but then how do they define the social equity applicant?
So there's a criteria, and I think the last read of it, there was like 3 prongs. You had to be, from a disproportionately impacted community, a certain level of, below the poverty line, and then have been arrested for or have a family member arrested for certain offenses. But it seemed to be that you had to hit all three prongs in order to qualify.
It sounds similar but more restrictive to Illinois' elements to social equity, and I'll have to give that another read. Let's talk about New York cannabis legalization news then. So if there are these two competing bills, how close to the finish line do you think either one is?
That's a great question, and I understand that there's a lot of discussions going on right now trying to figure out the path forward. Cuomo, the state legislators haven't ruled out legalizing this year through a special session. I mean, there's still the opportunity to do that, and so that's kind of where we're at. And really, this I know folks within Cuomo's organization and other advocacy groups, they've been engaging with each other, and they're really trying to listen and address all the concerns and do right by New York here. It's New York is just like it's going to happen in New York. It's just a matter of people wanting to do it the right way and addressing the right issues. And honestly, I think that's commendable. Instead of because we've seen from other states that focus on legalization and they say that hey, we'll fix this all later. Well later takes a long time and maybe never comes. And so the advocacy groups here, I think
Yeah, and that also has the issues with the legacy market. Then I think that's one of the reasons why with California and Washington's kind of cleaned up its act pretty well, but the other states out west that had a legacy market, and it would be more difficult to contain because there would be these laws that they would then override the next law. And so they wouldn't necessarily have taken the time. They just kind of did it. So New York is going to be hopefully the second state to legislatively do it. And I like that because then you have a bill and you have a law and you can read it. And you can understand how it's supposed to work, as opposed to what happens in like New York is different than New Jersey, for example. Because New Jersey, I thought, has a ballot initiative this fall. And so ballot initiatives, they put out language, but then they direct the legislature to go, draft it. And very often that can cause problems like it did in Arizona. So it'll be really, really cool to see, what bill emerges. But it kind of stinks in the sense that you have a divergence between the houses, in the sense the Senate wants the MRTA and Cuomo wants the CURTA. Yeah. And that's, we didn't have that in Illinois. We had unity. So it was like we had the CRTA and our governor didn't have his own plan. He was like, hey, you four ladies in the legislature, what's your plan? That's our plan.
Just a quick note on the ballot initiative, though. We don't have that process here in New York, so it's either through the legislature or we're shit out of luck here. Wow.
What, Elliot? Is there an estimate for how much it's going to cost to get into the industry, like a low barrier?
That's a great question. So I guess the best we can look at is the medical program here, and so to get into that, you had to pay a $10,000 application fee, and then there was also on top of that, you had to put up a $200,000 registration fee. That was refunded to you if you didn't get a license, but you had to put up that cash initially. So that's 210 different.
Hire a lawyer and a consultant to help you, or consultants. Yeah. Let's say you're going to be trying to put, build an indoor farm. That's several consultants. Let's say you're going to try to do your retail. I'm assuming it's going to be fairly onerous regulation, fairly onerous security, fairly onerous zoning restrictions. That could really push the price up. Illinois didn't have the $200,000. Hey, just let me have that money.
So for the medical program, hopefully, won't be that crazy for the adult use. And then obviously we all hope that the social equity applicants, get a waiver of that fee or a really reduced, fee.
Well, even with that 200, do you also have to already have the facility? Do you already have to have the location? Because you're just layering on money on top.
Yeah, so you got to have rights to the facility. You don't necessarily have to have a signed lease, and you don't have to necessarily be paying rent. So that was kind of a good feature there. I know that really kind of adds the cost for certain applicants.
Yeah, and that's something Illinois learned from their difference between medical to adult use rounds. It created an opportunity for landlords to kind of jack people and be like, oh, you want that? That'll be a $25,000 retainer bonus or something like that. And so in the Illinois round, and you might want to try to talk to the people in, is it Albany? Is that where your capital is?
Yeah, it's Albany. Yeah.
Okay, talking to people in Albany and say hey, you might want to consider having a 6-month window in a BLS region. And so in Illinois, the dispensary applications are matched per BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics region, as opposed to XYZ PDQ street. And so because of that, then you don't have that opportunity. So like you win a license for that region, and then you go get the address within 6 months after you win.
Oh, I like this idea of like, licensing or qualifying applicants before you make them go spend all that money, just so people know that, hey, I'm going to get a license, now I just need a location, right? As opposed to,
Right.
or now I just need funding, as opposed to like, hey, give me money, take on the risk of me not getting it.
Well, that's tough. I mean, because like with the application, and I'm assuming New York's going to be the same as all the other states. Your application is condition precedent of your license. And so the license regulatory regime is very, very thorough and strict. And then you're being compared to everybody else. And so you actually have like limited page numbers. So our applications, and I'm assuming yours were too, were like over 1,000 pages. And you're looking at that and you're like, man. And so when you have to hire high quality lawyers and consultants and maybe even some political lobbyists, and gosh knows what else is involved before all that money you have to pay to the state, it gets expensive to make that. It's just an expensive product. And that.
Do you see it being monopolized because of the high entry there, Elliot?
Well, I mean, look, you don't want to make it too high barrier, and you see limited operations, and then more people get their market share quickly, and it just doesn't really develop into a well-working market, and that's something we really want to avoid here in New York.
Right.
Yeah.
But you want to do it safely and regulated. So you're going to have pure supply and no diversion. However, that's that balancing act. And so, like, I think Illinois did pretty good. If you're budgeting between $500,000 and $1 million for a dispensary, or like $5-ish million for a 1,250 plant or a 5,000 square foot craft grow. Can they make the industry cheaper? Sure, they can do what Oklahoma did. But even then, in Oklahoma, if you go too cheap, you're going to be broke in anything. Like if you're not adequately capitalized in your industry, you risk your business.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's the culture like out there, Elliot? I mean, as far as you guys are bordered in Canada, you guys used to have high times, but like the show High Maintenance, right? You got the guy on the bike, he delivers to the buildings. I imagine you have a lot of black market like that. Is there a culture?
Like, half-baked took place.
Yeah, look, there's a great cannabis culture here in New York. I mean, like I said, we're way too proud talking about how big the market here is, and people have been doing this stuff for decades, and they've established channels and networks and the like, and that's why it's such a hard issue here, because there's just so many people that have been involved for so long that have their their view of where they should be going, and who should be benefiting ultimately. So just kind of on that point, one thing I know we've talked about here is the social equity, and the need to kind of give the social equity applicants a leg up within the industry. One thing I like to I know this is not a unique view, but I think we really need to start thinking outside of the cannabis industry when it comes to kind of social equity. I don't necessarily think we need to limit to who benefits from cannabis legalization to only those people who then decide to enter the cannabis market. Give the funds back to those communities. Look, we know who's been arrested, who's for these crimes. I mean, God forbid I use the word, maybe these guys deserve reparations. We threw them in jail, and now we're saying, hey, this is totally legal, and we know who those people are, right? And so it's not going to be that hard.
Like with the 13th Amendment, it's got a glaring hole in it, because it mentions crime or like punishment, because there would be no slavery except for a punishment of a crime. If I had the 13th Amendment in front of me, I could read it verbatim, but there is that exception that, so if they could just make you a criminal, and then what do? They just started making them criminals. It's ridiculous, and it's been going on for far too long. And so I'm thrilled that the cannabis industry is, again, it was the right thing to do 10 years ago, and it's the right thing to do today. It's just even righter, it's more correct. And so I'm excited about that type of wind of the back or wind of the sails or in our back kind of mentality that we have in the industry. But trying to fight for it so that it can be accessible to people is also really, really difficult, because you have immense greed and high barriers to entry. So, I mean, it is a fine tightrope. But as for other areas of the law, Elliot, have you done anything besides cannabis law?
So, before I came to Vicente, I was a corporate transactional lawyer here in New York. So, I was, one of many of those. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you have a due diligence checklist, huh?
Yeah, look, yeah. So, I brought all that experience here, and I'm trying to,
It's kind of like it's corporate law on steroids. And then
it's wild. That's
it is, and I geek out about it because I've quite enjoyed being a fairly, because I did a lot of financial litigation and then small amounts of transactional stuff, usually like workout agreements and stuff. But seeing, because I became a stockbroker after law school, so I've always kind of had that business bent to it. Seeing like how much capitalism and greed is involved and money is involved, and then like Illinois just invents this new class of like business called a social equity business. Like you get these points or you don't get these points. You either are or you're not. And so it's created all these business formation and operational issues that are unique. It's been a lot of fun. Like I haven't gotten any 10-day notices regarding the stuff that I put into my operating agreements, and why not? So I guess that's okay, right?
like I tell people that we don't get to be allowed to be creative in the legal industry, but within the cannabis industry, like you said, like everything's novel, everything's new, and you got to be creative, figure it out, and draft the right language.
Yeah, I mean, and once we agree on how to legalize it, right? Everybody wants to say deschedule, unschedule, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I say lab regulation is plant regulation. That's all we need. Whatever.
Yeah.
Hey, Elliot, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Where can we go to find or follow you if we have any more questions about cannabis in New York?
Let's see, our firm has a webpage, VicenteCederberg.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I'll share some of our, Twitter, Instagram, and all that good stuff, and I guess post it down in the comments or whatever you two people do.
Yeah, we'll add them to the description. And Tom, where can people learn more about the war on drugs?
Oh, people learn more about the war on drugs. Probably CannabisLegalizationNews.com, or you can go to CannabisIndustryLawyer.com, and there you can email me. I have a website for the publishing company I owned in law school that I'll put back up. I've just been busy.
You're going to give a book away?
What's that?
About a book. I thought you were going to give a book away.
Oh, I'll give a book away to somebody who emails me at tom@collateralbase.com, and then, ask me a question so we could read it on the air next week, and then I could also mail them out a copy of the book that I wrote.
Oh, awesome. Well, thanks for tuning in, everyone. Make sure you like and subscribe to keep up with all cannabis legalization news. We will see you on Sunday. Thanks.